Hello and welcome to the Tillage Edge with me, Michael Hennessy. This is your regular update for all your tillage news and advice. The extraordinary rise in all commodity prices is a double-edged sword. It's great to see grain prices climb to heights not seen in a long time. But at the same time, fuel, especially gas prices, have rocketed in price. Closing or scaling back production in fertiliser plants is common across Europe, and physical supply issues continue to be a factor. Farmers are watching this closely, and many will be considering what crops to grow in 2021, or indeed what crops require the highest nitrogen requirement. Profitability of these high nitrogen requirement crops comes into question, but good planning at this stage of the year may be the best chance to arrive at the most profitable outcome for 2022. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Ciaran and Shay, Phelan, both crop specialists from Teagasc. Gentlemen, you're very welcome to the podcast. Shay, I'll first come to you. Could you give us a view as regards the current state of play as regards price and supply of nitrogen at the moment?
There's plenty of talk out there at the moment, and I suppose that's the key thing, it's talk. And we really don't know at this stage yet what's the substance of all this. I mean, as you said, gas supplies are quite tight. Again, listening to media over the last couple of weeks, there's talks about some of the gas being released from Russia, so maybe that might alleviate some of the problems. There are other issues as well that are affecting the price of fertiliser at the moment. Potash being one of the big elements that we use every year. The EU currently have an embargo against Belarus, and Belarus is one of the biggest exporters of potash into the European Union. So that's having an effect, as well as the Chinese market, which is also having an effect as well. And again, China is a big user of potash and fertilisers, and also an exporter as well. So there are issues over there as well. I suppose the big fear we have, Michael, at the moment is that we talk ourselves into a crisis. And this is a global issue, not just an Irish issue. But similar to what we've seen in the UK with petrol, whereby we talk ourselves into a crisis and everybody kind of goes looking for fertiliser on the one day and at whatever price it is. I was reading an article just last week about a commentator saying, yes, there's plenty of fertiliser out there, but just at a price. So, I mean, there's an awful lot of speculation going on. I suppose the one thing that would concern me a little bit is that a lot of the factories should be making product at the moment, and there's no talk anywhere that they are actually manufacturing large supplies of fertiliser for the spring. So that would be a worry. But we'll just have to wait and see where it goes. I suppose there's little we can do about it, and I suppose talk is cheap at this stage, so we'll just have to see how it plays out in the spring.
Okay, so you mentioned that obviously nitrogen isn't really overly being made at the moment, and there's issues around potash or K as well. In terms of P, is there a shortage there, and maybe also then, given that you say everything probably will be bought at a price, but God knows what price that will be, should people be even considering a P and K holiday at this stage?
Yeah, it's a very valid question, I suppose. A lot of people are asking it at the moment. I would say the first thing that people should do is they should get an up-to-date soil test. And I know it sounds very basic, but unless you know what your levels of P and K and your pH of your soils are, it could be, false economy trying to take a P and K holiday. And don't forget, I suppose as well, that given the year we've had and the yields that we've had in 2021, there will have been quite a bit of P and K removed from the soils, albeit I know that some crops were chopped and the straw was chopped, so it would return P and K to those soils. And perhaps in those situations, there's certainly maybe an option to reduce down your P and K applications for 2022. But I suppose it's a bit general to say, yes, we can easily take a P and K holiday for the crops next year. It really is field specific, it's soil specific. I mean, there are crops or fields out there with high levels of high pHs. And in those fields, P and K can be locked up quite easy. So they do need a maintenance dressing of compounds. So I suppose there's a lot of factors to consider, I suppose, in short, before people decide that, yeah, I can take a P and K holiday in 2022. It's not just the price of the fertiliser, it's all the underlying issues as well.
Okay. And of course, Shay, we haven't really talked about the price of grain on the other side of it, which has gone up quite substantially as well, which is fantastic to see. And to a degree, I suppose, Ciaran, to bring you back into this here now, just in terms of that, increase in price, which is brilliant, but that can collapse, and that has happened before. And sure, we probably should really be planning for the worst case scenario. That's not an easy thing to do, but it's often a very necessary thing to do. So with crops in the ground, Ciaran, at the moment, what sort of a plan should farmers be thinking about for those crops at this stage?
Yeah, Michael, look, some crops are on the ground. We can't change that. But the basics, as Shay just said there, are crucial, like the soil test, and actually acting on the soil test. If I've got an index 4 that does not need P or K, correcting pH and opportunity to do that for spring crops. But I think every farm should have a nutrient management plan. That's the first step. Look at how many kilos of N, P and K I need to buy. And I suppose that's sort of the first step along the line. Secondly, for me, then, it's making the most efficient use of the nutrients that we have. Look, it's bringing in your organic manures where applicable. That can obviously give you good savings as well. But even when it comes to spreading, and I suppose maybe it's a conversation for next spring, but like making the most efficient use of the nitrogen, for example, that we put on the crop. Instead of going out in winter barley there in February when growth is poor, it's optimizing nitrogen uptake, which is applying it close to growth, the BER ratios, break-even ratios come in there. And I suppose another thing as well that we just can't beat is farmer knowledge. There's no two fields in the country the same, and the optimum level of nitrogen for the crop can be different in two adjoining fields even. So it's kind of your local knowledge of the field. Some fields of spring barley will give an optimum yield on 100 units, it could be 140 for another crop. So again, it's using your own knowledge of the crop really, and then making the most out of the fertilizers that apply then after that.
And we might come back to that in terms of farmer records, but I suppose when we talk about farmers maybe putting together some budgets and maybe some results maybe from 2021, I was chatting to a farmer and he was telling me that he is worried about him facing a substantial tax bill because obviously this year was a pretty good year in terms of returns. And ordinarily that farmer was probably thinking about buying fertilizer to offset some of that. Do you think that it really is an option this year, given where we are and where fertilizer prices may land?
Yeah, look, I suppose, it's very difficult to predict where things will go. But the one thing that you do know is the day that you buy, maybe if you can get a forward price for grain, And in my own opinion, if you can sell grain the day that you buy fertilizer, you can actually do your budget on the day. You can sell a proportion of your crop. And that does allow you to budget, and it certainly makes it a bit easier to predict your optimum nitrogen rates because you know what value that grain will be on an average yield, and the cost of that fertilizer. So I think if farmers are forced to buy fertilizer the year, which they may do in the autumn to, as you said, to offset maybe a tax liability or something like that, well, maybe selling grain at that time might be a good idea, especially when, there are good forward prices available at the moment. I think that's one of the crucial things for me. And I suppose the other thing is, the cost of that finance. Farmers are going to be paying maybe 2.5, 3 times more for fertilizer on current prices. That may change, hopefully it will. So there's the cost of that finance. If you're relying on a merchant to carry that all the way to harvest, I'm sure that they're going to be looking at that much differently this year. I don't think you can expect maybe the merchant to carry that. So again, you need to be talking to your bank or certainly doing a cash flow budget, just to line yourself up that you're not going to get caught short.
Yeah, lots of decisions to be made there. Ciaran, you mentioned in passing there the BER or break-even ratio. You might explain a little bit more about that and how it's calculated.
The break-even ratio is the crop yield needed to pay for a kilo of nitrogen. So as we apply nitrogen to our crop, our yield goes up. But we do reach a point where the cost of that extra kilo of nitrogen isn't being paid for. So if there are large changes to the ratio, we need to make adjustments to the recommendations. Now, typically, I suppose in the past, break-even ratios would have been maybe 2.5, 3, 4 to 1. Now they're probably somewhere in the region of maybe up to 10 to 1. So, if you look at prices for fertilizer that are being talked about at the moment versus the price of grain at the moment, for some high input crops, you could be talking about somewhere in the region of maybe 20 odd kilos per hectare of reduction requirement there. But that will depend again on the amount of nitrogen required for that crop, the price of grain and the price of fertiliser at the time.
So Shay, just coming back to you for a second, looking towards the spring crops that are out there, what sort of areas should growers look at now to try and ensure that they get the best from any of these expensive fertilisers they might purchase in the coming months?
Yeah, I don't want to harp on about it, Michael, but again, as I said, the first point is a soil test, having a valid soil test. And I suppose while I'm on soils, and Ciaran mentioned it there as well, correcting the pH if it needs to be corrected. They're the first two things that we'll try and get the best out of the fertilizers that are there. And while I'm talking about soils as well, the other thing we have to be careful of is the condition of the soils when we're actually working them. And by that, I mean not compacting the soils and being careful that we don't compact soils, whether it be on the headlands or out in the field, and working soils when they're fit to be worked. And that way you would get the best opportunity to maximize your yield and maximize the effect that you're going to get from your fertilizers. If you have compacted soils, you're less likely to get a response from your fertilizers than if the soil is not compacted. So the condition of the soil in the first instance is very, very important for the best activity of the soil, of the fertilizers, as is temperature and things like that as well. So getting the most from the fertilizer is critical, or getting the best out of your soils is critical for getting the best from your fertilizers. The other things that guys should be looking at is how to limit or to reduce down their dependence on fertilizers in the spring. And if we take it at the moment, there's quite a bit of oilseed rape got into the ground. Winter oilseed rape got into crops this back end. Many of those crops are actually in very good conditions. They're probably as advanced as they've ever been at this time of the year. And please God, they'll get through the winter unscathed or relatively unscathed. And we know that when you have big canopies of oilseed rape, you have nitrogen actually stored in the crop. So if we can get crops through the winter with large canopies on them with GAIs of 1.5 or more, there is a capacity there to cut back on the nitrogen requirement in those crops. So there's a definite saving that farmers can have in that there, just by having a good crop, keeping the pigeons out of it over the winter months, and then using the GAI app on your phone to generate how much, or to calculate how much nitrogen you need. And we've seen before in cases like this, Michael, where farmers have been able to grow oilseed rape on not much more than 120 to 150 kilos of nitrogen a hectare, which is quite a significant saving to what you would need if the crop is grazed bare. And likewise, I'm hearing a lot of interest in the likes of protein crops, peas and beans. Again, they don't have a requirement for nitrogen. You only need P and K on those crops as well. So there is a capacity there to cut back substantially on the amount of fertilizer required on the farm by growing crops like that. The third option then is if farmers have access to organic manures. And I suppose this is becoming more into the focus given the price of fertilizers at the moment and all the other concerns that are out there in terms of stocking rates on different farms and that. So there is an opportunity there, and we've seen a couple of cases of it this year, not only on spring crops where you can actually apply slurries and farmyard manures onto spring crops and then plough them in or cultivate them in, but also seen a couple of cases where guys are using them on winter crops as well with umbilical systems. So there is opportunities there if guys have capacity and the know-how and the way of applying organic manures onto crops in the spring. It certainly is an option to reduce down the fertilizer cost, the fertilizer burden on them.
And speaking about the cost, Shay, would you have any idea in terms of, I suppose, euros in the pocket that's saved in terms of using or utilizing organic manures really well and reducing that fertilizer bill?
Yeah, so say, for example, we're looking at spring barley crop. Okay, so we're looking at, say, applying 3,000 gallons an acre of cattle slurry. That's more or less the equivalent of 3 bags of 10-5-25 an acre. Okay, so if we take, say, just round figures for argument's sake, I'm not going to start getting into the exact prices of fertilizer. If we take a compound fertilizer, say something like 10-5-25, I'd say a round figure of 800 euros a ton, and we're talking about 375 kilos a hectare, or 3 bags an acre in old money, if you like, going onto that crop to get it started. You're looking at each of those 50 kilo bags, if you can visualize those, being worth about 40 euros a bag. So if we're putting out 3 of those bags an acre, that's 120 euros an acre, or 300 euros a hectare in compound fertilizers that those organic manures can save. Now, there's also always the cost of applying them and transporting them, which also have to be taken into account. But again, like they can save quite an amount of money for a farmer in that situation.
I suppose it's easy enough to do the maths on it, and when you start rounding it up into maybe figures that kind of do become eye-watering. If you
if you go to €1,000 a ton, for argument's sake, you're looking at 50 euros a bag, which is €150 an acre if you're applying 3,000 gallons of slurry. So, as you say, Michael, you can round those figures up to where people are talking at the moment,
In your example there, if you round it up to a 50-acre field, as many people would be putting in, that's €6,000 of the saving. Obviously, you have to spread it, but I mean that's pretty eye-watering kind of sums now, if you know what I mean. It starts really start to make sense.
Yeah, and exactly. And I suppose one of the big concerns people have with organic manures is the logistics of actually getting it done and the cost of getting them onto your farm. And I suppose that those costs that you're talking there, Michael, 50 acres costing you somewhere in the region of €6,000, it starts to make the transport cost and the hiring in of the contractor to apply these a bit more acceptable.
Ciaran, Shay mentioned a few solutions there earlier, and he talked about rotations and what they might look like on a farm, and with the aim of maybe reducing the overall dependency of nitrogen. How does that work out, do you think, on a farm, and how much is you capable of reducing on an overall farm?
I suppose it depends on the current rotation on the farm and what you're going to do. But I just did out a scenario that mightn't be untypical, say, of a 200-acre farm, say 80 hectares. And just as a baseline scenario I was just looking at was, say, 56 hectares of spring barley, 4 hectares of beans, 20 hectares of winter barley. So of the spring barley, there's 56 hectares, 4 hectares for that would be in an index 2, which is a reduced nitrogen from the beans the year before. So if we were to look at changing or maximising the area of beans on the farm, so to go 1 and 5, that would increase your area of beans up to 16 hectares. We can't do anything about the winter barley. That's in the ground at 20 hectares. So that would leave you with 44 hectares of spring barley. So if you compare the two scenarios of 4 hectares of beans normally and increasing that, say, maximising it to 16 hectares, that would reduce the nitrogen requirement on that farm by approximately 14.5%. Or nearly 2,000 kgs of nitrogen, or that's heading for 7 tons of CAN equivalent. So like at €600 a ton, that's over €4,000 of a difference. And obviously there's P&K, maybe possible savings there as well.
And I suppose that's one way of going at in terms of utilising a crop that produces its own nitrogen. But what about using that, using less nitrogen, if you like, on the crops, as you mentioned in the BER? Is there an element of reducing or compromising yield and perhaps overall farm profitability then?
Yeah, that's a very important point. I suppose every farmer wants to maximise yield, but again, like I said previously, I think it is really down to your previous farm history. High organic matter soils are going to give you a little bit more nitrogen back every year. So I think field history is one part of it. And then looking at the BER ratio there as well. And I suppose in that example that I gave, where you're looking at beans, and I suppose that's not a one-hit wonder, because if you're looking at that 16 hectares of beans, that's 16 hectares of, say, spring or winter barley or whatever the succeeding crop is, that's dropping to index 2 again next year, which, is a further saving. In addition to, the whole rotation and soil benefits and, the yield enhancement that we often get from, succeeding crops after the likes of beans,
Okay, so it might increase the profitability, not just maybe in this year, but maybe in subsequent years as well. So
yeah, and again, it's like looking at your profit monitor or your e-crops or whatever way you do your crop budgets and margins, and it's what crops are paying on my farm. And if spring feed barley is a low margin crop, replacing with something like beans would be a sensible approach.
And you took the words right out of my mouth. That's kind of my next question. In terms of farmers out there who are looking for a little bit of help, are there any tools out there which can help a farmer calculate these figures to drive along the road of making those decisions?
Yeah, I suppose I've almost answered my own question, but certainly crop records, looking at the margins, as I said, from previous crops. I think that's the big one. I mean, I mentioned at the very start, doing a nutrient management plan is essential, but also doing a budget for next year's crops is essential as well, because when you have to fork out a lot more money on inputs, fertilizer obviously being the key one, but other inputs as well. Seed is more expensive, diesel to put into the tractor is going to be more expensive, so we have to watch all of those things. So, doing a profit monitor, I think, is vital this year, and to see where you're going and to budget from there. But not alone that, there are other tools I think you should look at, the likes of rotation calculator, just to see, as I said, we don't look at 1 year in isolation. We have to look over the duration of the rotation. And then obviously, as I said, the likes of the break-even ratios, the day you're buying fertilizer, look at the value of grain, and maybe you can sell some of that grain at that same time as well, Michael,
I suppose on a positive point and all that, I know farmers generally don't like doing looking at last year's profitability, if you like, but I suppose they hopefully should have a smile on their face this year, given the fact that with good yields and good prices, so they should have made good money this year for the most part. Ciaran and Shay, thanks very much for your input. We're going to come back to this topic again. It's like a live hand grenade about to go off. I think we don't know where it's going to land yet. Hopefully it won't be too bad, but we will be coming back to this again, and hopefully you'll join me again. Thanks very much, guys.
Thanks, Michael.
No problem, Michael.
So that's it for the Tillage Edge, and my thanks to Shay and Ciaran for joining me on the podcast. Finally, don't forget, if you like the podcast, then recommend it to a friend or colleague. And as always, rate, review and subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify so you never miss an episode. And for more information, go to teagasc.ie. I'm Michael Hennessy. Thanks for listening. I'll be back next week with more tillage news and advice.